The crimes, the criminals, why did they do it? Who got hurt? Did they meet justice or commit the perfect crime? You'll find all the clues at Jim Harold's Crime Scene. Welcome to the Crime Scene. I am Jim Harold and so glad to be with you once again. And a few weeks ago we did a fascinating show, at least I thought it was, on the topic of Jonestown, Guyana, and Jim Jones, the People's Temple, and of course the tragedy from the late 1970s, the mass suicide that went on that was really at the hand of Jim Jones, just a horrible, horrible thing. And as a follow-up, I thought it would be very interesting to talk to a member or a former member, even though an unwilling member as a child, of a cult, and see what it was like on the inside of a different kind of cult. And that's what we did. Our guest has some very interesting things to say about her experience, and the organization she speaks of, I have no firsthand knowledge of. So these are her claims and her claims alone. They're not necessarily reflective of ours, but it is fascinating to hear the viewpoint of someone who says that they were on the inside and tragically experienced being inside a cult through no choice of their own. Chilling stuff. And here's the show. Welcome to the program. We're so glad to be with you once again. And today we're going to talk about something, well, honestly, it can be very difficult because we're talking about the topics of cults. And we're going to talk to someone whose life was greatly affected by this. I'm talking about Vennie Kocsis. And Vennie has written a book called Cult Child, talking about her experience from cult survivor to thriver. She's a best-selling author, and she also utilizes art to express the pain of her childhood experiences of growing up and being abused in a cult. Vennie, welcome to the program today.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
So tell us, what exactly, how did you get involved in a cult? I know it was a very young age. It wasn't something you had a choice in. You kind of brought along, but tell us how that happened for you.
The lady that recruited my mother, worked on her for about 4 years. So started working on her when my mother was pregnant with me. I was 3 years old. It was, the time of the Cold War, so 1973. And my mother just believed everything that had been taught to her in the prior 4 years, that the world was ending. The Russians were coming. We were God's chosen army, and it was time to go to the wilderness and go there to be safe and wait for the rapture and be ready to die should the Russians invade America.
Oh my. Yeah, that's very scary. That, and using little kernels of truth, because it was just like now, it was a very dangerous time, but taking a little kernel of truth, the fact that, yeah, things could go bad, and kind of twisting it and kind of getting somebody into something like this.
Right, because love bombing was such an intricate tool. You are special. God has chosen you and your family to be a part of his chosen army. All these other people in the secular world, you see, they're nothing, they're not special, not like you. So she didn't really have a totality of what she was walking into or what it would be like once we arrived to the first compound.
Now, let's back up a minute. You used the phrase love bombing, and maybe, I kind of got in context what you meant, but I'd not necessarily heard about that. What is love bombing?
Love bombing is, when you pump someone's ego. I mean, it's used in relationships. Salespeople use this tactic. Preachers use this tactic. It's pumping you up and making you feel super special, that you're a part of something amazing and great, when actually it's a lie. You're not. You're being lured into something very sinister. But that tactic is used to skew your mind.
So your mother was indoctrinated. She was brought into this. Describe for us, what was this cult exactly?
Well, Sam Fife started this around the 60s. I know actually he briefly rubbed shoulders with Jim Jones. As I understand it, they were both in South America around the same time. He often flew to South America, but he came up and along with Doug McLean, Bob Crowley, Doug McLean's father, Donald, they bought up a lot of land across the United States and started compounds. As I understand it, the first one I was on was, an abandoned. There were a lot of bases that were secret bases in America that they no longer needed. They were selling off the land in private auction, and somehow they got their hands on that in Massachusetts. And then in Alaska, we're just buying up parcels like crazy before the Alaska dividends dropped. But that's how he got started. Where he got the money, where all the funding came from, that's a very good question. Aside from the people that he was convincing to give over their money and child support and income and things like that to support, this great cause of saving the world.
What were the tenants? What were some of the tenants, other than we were kind of at the end times? What were some of the other tenants of this cult?
They very much believed in demon possession. There's an article from, I believe, around 1977. I have posted it on one of my blogs, where a man named Bill Greer, who was one of Sam's father ministry, was actually arrested in California for, at that time, they had about 44,000 followers to this religion, for trying to do exorcism on some teenagers at a high school. So demon possession was one of their major belief systems that they used, to keep you in fear. So everything for us as children was a demon. If you laughed too much, you had a demon of silliness. Anything really that you did that was considered what they called feeding the flesh. So if you're enjoying something, you're feeding your own flesh or being selfish. So their philosophy was very much about stripping a child. He called a child's rear end the backseat of learning, and remolding them into the likeness of God, because all children were born sin. So that was a big, big philosophy. They were very Old Testament, faith healing. We weren't taken to the doctor, so many babies and children died over the years on this cult. So I very much relate to Pentecostalism, to Jehovah's Witnesses, because we weren't allowed to celebrate any birthdays or holidays. Things like that. I even lost track of my age for a little bit. But that was their main philosophy, and then that he was God's chosen. And then there was this fivefold ministry around him that he took from the Bible, that God elected teachers and, these special people that he turned into his father ministry, which were mostly male. It was quite a patriarchal system as well. So.
Now, and you may have mentioned this if I missed it, how many people were in the compound, or I know you've moved from place to place somewhat, but some of the places you were, typically how many people would be in a compound?
The first one that I was on, I was ages 3 to 7, was in Ware, Massachusetts, and I'd say 150 on that compound. Then moving forward into Alaska, right before 1979, which is when those Alaskan pipeline dividends kicked in. So At that time, people were getting about $1,000 a year. They started building compounds, buying land, moving people up there. That was in 1977, so that they could get their year residency in and cash in on those dividends starting when they kicked in. Now, they'll tell you that's not why they did that, but that is why they did that. I mean, it's very apparent. They built most of their compounds up there. I think there were 5, 6 of them with 100 to 200 people on each one. So do the math. It was a lucrative move for them to make. And I have some of the original deeds where they were quit selling the deeds back and forth for like $10 to each other, and just things like that are very questionable, but that would be a good number. There was also and they're still there today. I mean, the compound I was on is still there today. And then more compounds. Bowens Mill, Georgia is kind of their headquarters, where a lot of the elderly are held, and all of their Social Security and state welfare and everything goes to the coal. That's where all the books are done. So
this organization exists to this day.
Oh, yes. I would say it's more powerful than ever. I mean, they built quite a large network, based off of the back of the beginning days with us, with child labor and mind control and all of the things that they did. They have, as another cult survivor and I can deduct, so far around 22 compounds across the globe. They have a huge one in India.
And this organization is entitled Move of God?
Well, they do this changing of names. So each one is they're not like the Catholic Church where there's one kind of top. They make sure and split it up so that they can say, oh no, we're not associated with them. However, for instance, Whitestone Farms in Alaska. If you spoke to Bill Greer, he would probably tell you, no, we're not associated with the Move. But when you look at their convention schedule, Whitestone Farms is on it, where they're going to have a convention there. So you can link the web by just paying attention to what they type, who he glorifies buying the land and things like that. But yeah, they definitely stay split for, I'm sure, lawsuit purposes and things like that.
Now, when you were in this group of compounds, could people come and go as they want, or were they threatened if they tried to leave?
No, you could not come and go as you want. Absolutely not. The compound was always, it was nothing to see, young men with guns slung over their shoulders. I've got some pictures of that as well on my blog. They were always watching the perimeters. Now, they would tell you see, that they were doing it to keep you safe. This is very similar to how Jim Jones's organization worked, right? They had the guns, but they told the people, well, it's to keep the wild animals out, et cetera, et cetera. Well, when you have that much acreage, if somebody's on one side of the compound and the watchmen are on the other, I mean, it's not about the animals or keeping bears out or anything like that. I mean, my brother ran away the second time and they went into the woods after him. So it was very much monitored, and no, we were not given any access to the outside world.
And you're not the only one who's saying that you were subject to these kind of things. There's other people who have come out and said that they were subjected to similar abuse and so forth, correct? Oh,
yes. Yes. There's many of them. And another survivor's written a book. There's a Yahoo group with 600 members, some current members of the Move, some, abused children. And then I have a private group on Facebook where there's about 30 kids, and most of us tell a similar story. And it was quite shocking when I first found everyone to know that these abuses weren't just going on. They were on every compound, but some of them were worse because they considered some of the compounds to be what they called deliverance farms. So on those compounds, there was some hardcore brutality going on because those people were believed to have demon spirits inside of them, or legions of them.
Oh my goodness. Well, yeah. We're talking with Vennie Kocsis. The book is Cult Child, and after this, we're going to talk to her more about her experience as a child in what she says was a cult. And we're so glad to have her with us tonight. And we'll be back right after this. Our sponsors are Wild Blue Press, publishers of books, ebooks, and audiobooks in several genres. Wild Blue Press is running an extravaganza contest and giving away 5 books, ebooks, or audiobooks of your choice, as well as a free Kindle. 2 winners will be selected based on the quality of their answers to the questions on the quick survey. 2 contest winners will each have their choice of 2 of the following. 1, 5 signed copies of Wild Blue Press paperbacks. 2, 5 ebooks. 3, 5 audiobooks. 4, and Amazon Kindle. To enter the contest, go to wildbluepress.com/survey. That's wildbluepress.com/survey. Thanks, Wild Blue Press. We're back on the program. Our guest is Vennie Kocsis. She is the author of the book Cult Child, and she was that cult child, and is telling us about her experience in a religious organization that she says was a cult, and really just horrible, horrible things that were done, and just not being able to come and go as you want, and obviously being subjected to something like this when you're a child. Vennie, abuse. Was abuse widespread? Did they pick on certain people? It sounds like you certainly were a victim of abuse. What was the part of abuse in kind of keeping control of this organization?
Well, Ware, Massachusetts, from the time I was 3 years old to 7, all of us children who were there, we all tell the same story. I'm probably the strongest one speaking out about it because the horror on that compound was so deep. And I'll just briefly tell you some of the situations. Being put in ice baths and then whipped with a belt, sleep deprivation, being awakened at night to pray. We were separated from our parents and put in these classification rooms depending on our age. Public humiliation. I'm deaf in my right ear, so I was always a very loud child. But nobody ever took into consideration, you see, that I was deaf, so they would tape your mouth. I can remember going a whole day with tape on my mouth. And definitely some hardcore exorcisms where we were tied to chairs, beaten about our head. Beaten about our bodies while 3-4 elders were screaming Bible verses at us, pulling our hair. My brother recalls being used as a model to teach other adults the proper way to discipline a child. The list goes on, including sexual molestation. And because, you see, they believed that pedophilia was a demon spirit that they could cast out. So they welcomed pedophiles to come to this cult for healing. And there we were, all of us children. So, that was just, and then in Alaska, I was getting older, 7, 8, 9 years old. The same thing, just beatings. They spanked babies, Jim. It was horrible because Sam taught that if you began to discipline a child very early, 3, 4 weeks old, you see, to train them not to cry, because crying, they were being selfish. They were caring only about their own needs, and a baby should be trained not to do that. And that was the philosophy that they taught.
Oh, that's terrible.
It was horrible.
Now, as this progressed, as you started to get older, did you, what was your reaction to it at the time? Did you buy into it in your earlier years, and as you got older, you saw the error of the ways? For you, your personal journey, how did that go?
Well, when I was very young in Ware, Massachusetts, my memories are very scattered because the abuse was so intense. There's large gaps. In Alaska, there are a few gaps in the beginning, but then, I get older. But you're so in compliance, always walking on eggshells. Not only you don't know who's watching you, who you can trust. They very much keep that deceptive, gossipy ideal that everybody's watching you. You better not mess up, So it was just always that. And then what I had in my head, I had to just keep in my head, because there was no ability to express it. And so that's just what I did. I even remember that my father one time sent a state worker to do a wellness check on us. And this is a good example of how they love bombed us. We got called into a meeting. We were told that our father had sent the devil's army to come and try to destroy our mother. And this was a great opportunity for us girls, my sister and I, to defend God's army and protect our mother. And so they really pumped us up that we got to do this really special thing for our mother. So we were standing there. The worker took us off alone, first my sister and then me. Inside my head, everything was screaming, tell her, tell her. But you don't. You're held in fear that if she doesn't take you, what's going to happen? What kind of punishment are you going to receive for not following instructions? I mean, that was the main thing that held me silent. Had she been trained in body language and seen my hung head, my scuffed shoes, my shoulders, the fact I couldn't look her in the eye, she would have known immediately something was wrong. But she didn't. So that, you're so deep in mind control and fear. I mean, the fear was next level. You were just always in the unknown. So you just didn't even think about it. I mean, all I thought about was turning 18. When I could legally leave that place and they couldn't make me stay. And then how would I run away and where would I go?
Were there people you think that were in a kind of Stockholm Syndrome? Was that part of the picture? In the sense that of being captive to someone, you start to buy into their lies.
Well, yeah, absolutely. I mean, yeah, that's definitely a big part of it. I mean, they revered Sam Fife. I mean, whenever the Father Ministry came, it was a huge feast. The best food was cooked. It was like celebrities were coming to the compound. So there was definitely a classist system. Like, I know elders' children who weren't even abused and didn't even know that some of us were so abused, and then elders' children who were abused. It was just such a classist system. And then, we were kind of bottom of the totem pole, being children of a divorced woman. Ironically, they urged my mother to give my father an ultimatum, and then subsequently went on to punish her for being a staying divorced woman, as they took my father's child support for the cult.
And how long did you end up staying in this group?
Well, when I was 14, my sister was raped, and she had been being raped over a period of time, and they got caught. Or the man, I say it's rape because he was in his 40s and she was a teenager. And to me, that's seductive rape. He, promised her he was going to take her away from there. They made her stand up in front of the congregation and say that she was a whore of Babylon, that it was all of her fault. That was just their philosophy. Anytime something like that happened, even now to this day, they will still say, well, she was a seductive child. And there's no such thing as a seductive child. There's only a pedophile who sees a child as seductive. So that's how they treated us. And then they shunned us and banned us from the cult. And that's how we ended up leaving.
And again, it's going to be an odd question because the answer may be not yet. But how long did it take you to come to terms with this? I mean, obviously this happened to you at a very formative age, these horrible things happening to you, to your sister, to people around you, just a whole kind of melange of badness. And I've got to think there's things like post-traumatic stress disorder and all these different things that come out of it. Is it something that you immediately tried to put behind you and not think about? Did you bring it out and try to deal with it? How did you deal with it in the years to come?
Well, I became a very angry teenager because my mother had been so mind controlled into narcissism over a span of 11 years. She never changed that behavior. She never, ever held accountability, ever. And you could not talk to her about it. So when we first got off the cult as a teenager, I don't know if I could define it yet as abuse because I didn't have the language or the education to look at it in that way. I just knew I hated my mother and that I had just come from a very bad place. And then I became a single mom in my adult years, and I went probably into a little bit of traumatic amnesia where I went into autopilot trying to manage and be a parent, but you can see the trauma in my poetry and things I was writing at that time. And not until I really started writing Cold Child did I force myself to face my memories and look at them square in the face and get in them, the sounds, the smells, the everything.
And what difference has made writing this book, Cold Child? How has it changed your life?
I can't really say that it's changed my life, except for allowing me to kind of create a manifesto and take those memories and put them on paper. It actually left me quite exhausted and needing a little bit of respite to recover from it. And it really was more of just a pulling back of a scab, because I'm still digging out so many layers of what I went through, with connections to the paranormal, connections to secret government programs, things that blow my mind. And in a way, sometimes when you look at your childhood, it feels like it happened to another kid, most likely because I was dissociated so much. So it's changed my life for the better, in that I've been able to connect with a lot of abuse survivors and realize that when you strip away theology and all of that, I see so much of these same abuses, just even in homes. And so I've been able to connect with a lot of survivors and support them. And I would say that's the thing that makes me feel the best about what has come out of writing Cold Child.
Yeah, I was going to ask about people reaching out to you and saying, Vennie, you're not the only one. I had a similar experience, and here it is.
Yes, absolutely. I have a little video I made about that, because I was talking about, we didn't have an electricity in Alaska, so we used outhouses and lived off the land. And I told that story one day, and suddenly other people were telling stories, like a man from Cuba talking about being arrested for hoarding toilet paper. Another girl told me about growing up in a cult in India where they had to squat in holes in the ground. Yes, you do. You share a story and find out all these other people have had linear experiences as kids.
Well, it is a very sad story. I mean, I guess looking back at this point, do you feel as though at this point you've come to terms with it, in the sense that you're going to go on, you're going to promote the book, let people know about the book, and kind of let people know about your broader message? Is it more of a looking forward now, maybe more than looking back?
Yes. I've written 2 other books. One is a poetry book called Dusted Shelves, and I also have an audio CD I recorded of it that goes with it. And then I also created a gratitude journal while I was writing Cold Child. Really, it was my own method of getting through. I needed to utilize gratitude to stabilize my emotions. And I'm writing the sequel to Cold Child right now, called Rise of Sila. So absolutely. I mean, moving forward, that is where I'm moving towards, is into more advocacy work, dealing with cults, helping people who've left cults, hopefully being a part of changing some laws in regards to faith healing and not taking children to doctors, and them not having birth certificates. All of those things are my goals now, and things that I work on and support now.
And I'm very curious about this, because we just not that long ago had an interview with a gentleman who wrote a book about Jim Jones, a major release, and what a tragic case that was. Now, I think people think that cults are a thing of the past. You had said earlier that you believe there's still, I believe, and if I'm misquoting you, let me know, but there's still a lot of cult-type activity going on. What are some warning signs? Maybe if you're getting involved in something, you're an adult, and you find this group and they seem very loving. What are some of the warning signs you need to watch out for?
Definitely, if people are talking in absolutes, like I can give you an example of how my mother was lured. It's like, well, come to our Bible study. So you go to the Bible study, maybe it's in someone's home, you're someone looking for a little bit of camaraderie. If there's a leader and that leader says that, an entity speaks through them and they are the authority for that entity, they begin to separate you from your family, turn you from your family and say, well, because they don't believe like you, they're not your real family, we're your real family. All of those things of isolating you over time, people just have to stay somehow aware of that. It can be difficult because they do it so subtly and so slowly. But those are major, major signs. The absolute talking, being told how to dress, I had one girl tell me that she had really long hair, and after about 3 months, they were like, you should cut your hair because long hair is a sign of vanity. So those types of things are red flags. And it was a red flag for her that she was like, is this an okay thing? And I said, no, that's not an okay thing. All of those patterns you'll find really kind of within religion itself, which sets the standard of how you're supposed to live. I think that's all a red flag because we're all individuals.
Well, again, very interesting. Vennie, where can people find out more information about the book? And also, I know you have a website and you have videos and art and poetry and so forth.
Yeah.
How can people connect to all the different things that you do?
The best place to go is to my website, which is VennieKocsis.com, VennieKocsis.com. And from there, you can find my blog. You can find my art store, the bookstore, everything. That's the best hub to begin at.
Well, Vennie, thank you very much for joining us tonight on the program.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
The book is Cult Child, written by our guest tonight, Vennie Kocsis. And as we always say, thank you for joining us on the program, and be careful out there, not just in the sense of physical crime, but mental crime, where somebody may try to take advantage of you. Be careful. We'll talk to you next time. Have a great week, everybody.